we would like to speak tonight of our hopes, because our hopes can be instruments to magnetize perfection. If we were already perfected, there would be no need to hope for it. But inasmuch as it has not manifested on the planet for all men, we all hope for perfection, either for ourselves or for others. Most of us hope for both. And I think, as I meditate on perfection and on the hope of perfection, that this is a very beautiful magnet which God has implanted in the heart of the universe, whose tender emanation is now and always passing through space to encourage us in those moments when the dark shadows of the world seem to shut out the light of truth in reality. We would not dwell, therefore, upon those dark shadows, but it would appear that a moment's contact with them as a point of contrast would be helpful for us in realizing the light. It is only of recent years that I have been able to bring some degree of definition to life upon earth as it is lived in the world today. Most of the time I have more or less pursued my destiny toward trying to find the things of God, and I have somehow not spent too much time in actually analyzing just what it would be like to be outside of the faith, to be outside of contact with God, to be outside of contact with the ascended masters, to be cut off from the teaching of the truth. I have not actually stopped too much to think about that as an eventuality, as something that could happen. But I think that it is a good idea sometimes that we realize that if it were not for the grace of God that enables us to recognize the truth when we hear it, and to feel the responses in our being to the call of God, we would ourselves be cut off from reality and enmeshed in the state of unknowing that seems to presently guide mankind, if you can call it guiding them. Now, for example, I think that the greatest trap in the world today is the trap of worldly pleasure, and I think that second to it, as a trap goes, is the trap of worldly competition or competitiveness. And I think then, following pleasure and competition, we have the traps of false niches, being put into places where truth is not taught, and yet believing that we are receiving truth. I think that in itself is another very serious trap. And fourth on the list, I place the bad music that is now being released in the world and has been for some time. And perhaps fifth on the list is the drug cult that has been fostered upon our young people and upon the older people too, as a key that is supposed to open up the spiritual senses, and that does only open up or quicken senses and contacts into the psychic realm. So that many of these very splendid young hearts who really want to find God are not able to find Him because they are sidetracked or detoured into a blind alley that proves to be a drain that pulls the energies down and destroys the fabric of mind and being. So you see, you have that also, music and drugs, and then you have the pitfalls of worldly desires, which comes under pleasure, one of the first ones I mentioned. Then I think the last trap I would mention is the trap of social justice, which I prefer to term social injustice. Because you cannot legislate and you cannot, by mob rule, create perfection in the world, but only by the rule of law under God, which brings each of us to a point where we seek the pinnacle of our existence. We seek to find the summit of being. And there at the summit of being, we realize that the divine law is, I am my brother's keeper. And we realize also that in addition to being our brother's keeper, we must hold a sense of the golden rule toward him, regardless of his standard of conduct toward us. In other words, we must not permit his standard of conduct to create our reactionary standard. We must not live a life of reaction to other people's doings, so that we are not initiators of right energy ourselves. If we know what is right, we should do it because it is right, not because someone else pulled the strings that creates an activity that is often not benign, but karma-making, and ultimately will bring us downward instead of raising us upward. Because after all, what is the purpose of life anyway? Isn't it to rise from whatever state of consciousness we are in? Isn't each day supposed to be a ladder? And each day we're supposed to put our feet just 1 inch higher? We may not always see that, but if we're about our Father's business, doing it to the best of our ability, we are going to actually be doing that. It isn't exactly like a material ladder. You can see just where you are on a material ladder. But on a spiritual ladder, you have to use a little power of vision. Otherwise, the ladder might become a slide, and you can go down a lot faster than you go up. But God doesn't want us to be ruled by fear. He wants us to be ruled by love. Yet we must recognize that there are only 2 motivating forces in the entire universe. And these 2 forces are fear and love, as far as goads go, that will make people do things. You can make people do things through fear, and you can make them do it through love. And fear is stronger than love as far as the world responses go, because the world has not yet learned the meaning of the true vibration of love. The love vibrations that they're talking about today are entirely different than the love vibrations of the great masters, who are never conditioned by expectancy. In other words, so many people love someone because they expect to receive something in return for their love. It is a matter of reward. A man marries a woman because he expects to receive something from her, and vice versa. And people join organizations because they expect the organization is going to do something for them. But love is not like that. And it's a very strange thing that although this has been written down and spoken by the great masters again and again, and people have always, when they heard it, leaped for joy, and they've said, yes, I know that's the kind of love that I should have, is the kind of love that loves to do, to be about the Father's business, to do something for others because we truly love them. We've recognized it. We've said, yes, that's right. But when it comes to the doing of the deed, that's where the problem comes in. Because somehow or other we seem to have that sly hope that maybe life is a lottery. And perhaps after all our number will come up and there just may be some reward in it for us. Something is going to happen. Prosperity just around the corner. It's there. Well, it is there. The only thing is that we ourselves, as human beings, have no right to try to say to the universe, this is what I want for what I do. This is bargaining with God. We should not bargain with God. We shouldn't even bargain with one another. We should just do the things that are the law of our being. And in that connection, I want to point out to you one of the greatest teachings of the masters of the Far East. And that has to do with what we will call satsanga, or fellowship with truth. Birds of a feather flock together, my mother used to say. And I suspect that these words must have been written in heaven, because they are true. And you will usually find that this is so, but there have been exceptions, as in the case of our beloved Jesus and others of the great masters, who have often fellowshipped with harlots and with thieves and with people whose standards were entirely different than one would suppose would be the standards of the great masters. But then, after all, what did the Master say? The Master said, the Son of Man came not to save that which is already saved, but to save that which is lost. And therefore, all of us, in that sense, should be willing to do what we can to help our fellow men, but should recognize that we first of all have a responsibility toward ourselves, so that we do not bankrupt ourselves and then come to help our fellow man with no substance to give. And this is what will happen if we are not judicious, careful in our givingness unto men. You know, it's like certain types of activity in the chemical field, such as in yogurt making. When you're making yogurt, you have to always save a little bit of yogurt. You can't drink it all up, the last drop, and then think you're going to have some for the next batch, because you've got to have some seed. And so when it comes to matters of satsanga, beginning students who are starting out, or even those who are fairly well advanced, should be careful that they do not spend over much time with those whose vibrations and vibrational patterns will pull them down into the same negative patterns that they were in before they got away. You've always got to save back a little seed, a little of the righteousness of the divine leaven in yourselves. Otherwise, if you lose it all, and you get down into the vibration where you feel that horrible vacuum, you're going to find you're going to have to start all over again. You're going to have to go to God, and you may have quite a problem in actually gathering enough light till you feel in your own being that you are once again restored to where you function as a flame. In other words, don't let people with their water or emotional substance put out the fire of your soul. So there is an awful lot to think about in connection with manifesting the divine life. I used to think it was such an easy, simple thing. Well, it really is. It isn't complicated. It doesn't have to be. But yet there are a lot of laws involved here that the innocent person, or the beginning person, who is so sincere and so much in love with the Ascended Master revelation, who turns around and gets into the vibration of the world through fellowshipping the world, and then finds themselves pulled down. And in a pulled-down state, any one of us can become a bit disgruntled. I'm no exception, I don't think. If I let myself go far enough, why not? So we have to constantly remain on guard. That's part of the divine plan. The great masters themselves have told us, and they certainly have emphasized it. Even the archangels, when they come into the atmosphere of this earth, they are so smart, and of course you know fools rush in where angels fear to tread. The archangels put helmets on their head of crystalline substance in order to penetrate human density. And when they come down through, it's almost like the heat shield that you put on these astronaut spaceships. When you come down through space, you know, there's a tremendous impact and shattering substance. You hear it in the breaking of the sound barriers by our jet planes. And you'll also find that it's true of yourself. When you come in contact with a real bad negative vibration, unless you have your tube of light thoroughly around yourself, unless you have anchored yourself into the innocence of the Christ and the Ascended Masters, you can very easily be pulled down into the vibration of the world. I've watched this again and again, and I've particularly watched it because I'm now becoming more and more aware and sensitive to the vibrations in the world that are actually molding the world according to their own patterns. So I want to return back to some of these earlier things. I said pleasure. The Scriptures said that people were lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. Well, God is not a creature to be worshipped. God is the creator of all good things. And he creates innocence because he himself is innocent of harm. And in a way, innocence means the inner sense. The inner sense is pure. It is innocent of harm. And God creates that vibration. So when we talk about loving pleasure more than loving God, we refer to the pleasures of the table. Does this mean that I'm supposed to hate chicken dinner? Or I'm supposed to hate all forms of food or nourishment? That's the pleasures of the table in a way. Of course not. But you know, it all becomes a matter of this. Some people say that they eat to live, and other people live to eat. And that's what we refer to here. If we take into our body enough substance that the body needs, this is an ordinate activity. The great masters have always demonstrated caution in their habits. As they move toward perfection, as they move to becoming perfected, they always abstain more or less. And we find a very interesting thing in the writings of Madame d'Adamar, who wrote on Saint Germain at the court of France. And she recounted that he ate very, very little and very sparingly. In fact, he often merely seemed to nibble at his food and would leave the bulk of it on his plate. We often find this is the case, and we recall when the great adepts came down to meet Abraham and others referred to in the Old Testament, that many times, and Lot too, and when they came down, these great adepts, the old patriarchs, like Abraham and Lot, they ran quickly and they got food. They'd maybe get goat cheese and different things. They'd set it there on a rock in front of these visitors. Well, this was an Eastern custom, you see. When the guests came, he was king, and they went to get it. Well, of course, the great masters, the adepts, they said, no, don't bother with this. But when they brought it out, what did the great masters do? They took their staff in their hand, they reached it out and touched the food, and immediately it caught fire, and it burst into flame, and it consumed itself. In a sense, then, they returned the food as an offering to the universal, because they themselves had their own contact with the universal, and they did not need to take that food in at all. So you see, ordinance is necessary, the ordinance and ritual of eating and partaking of certain things. But it should be done decently and in order, not as an end in itself, but as a means to an end. Now then, when it comes to other pleasures, perhaps one of the greatest pleasures that human beings seem to have is the pleasure of recognition. Everyone likes to be recognized for something. And for that reason, some people even choose a life of crime, because they would rather have recognition as a criminal than not to be recognized at all. And of course this is wrong, but it's a part of the human miasma. It's a part of the human pattern. We crave recognition. And so there are many things that we can be recognized for. And we have to recognize the idea of the big frog in the little pond and the little frog in the big pond and so forth. Some people choose to live in a small town because they can be a big frog or a little frog in a small pond, and they seem much bigger than that, you see. Some people prefer the anonymity of living in a big city where they can bury themselves and become just part of the masses. But recognition is what we're talking about. Why do people crave recognition? I will tell you why. Because the God, the good, within the soul wants to be recognized. And we revert it, we invert it, we turn it upside down. Instead of recognizing this God that is within us, we crave recognition of our little self. We want people to say, oh my, doesn't she make a wonderful cake? Or doesn't she look beautiful? She looks so pretty. Or he looks so handsome. or they're making so much money, or they're so successful. Yet in the long run, when all of these things come to the final end, and you can talk to any people you want to, and they'll all agree with the same thing, and you find this in that movie that Orson Welles played in, dramatizing the life of William Randolph Hearst. Who remembers that movie? Citizen Kane. In Citizen Kane, which dramatized the life of William Randolph Hearst, we find that the little sled Rosebud, which the picture opened with, it showed William Randolph Hearst as a little boy with this little sled that had been given to him as a Christmas gift called Rosebud. And he was sliding down the hill with that. And after all of his life had gone by, and I've stood in Hearst Castle in California and seen it, after all of his life had gone by, his affair with Marion Davies, his beautiful tower suite, his illegitimate children sent to Paris, his tycoon-like magnificence as a great newspaper publisher, after all was finally said and done, in this film, Citizen Kane, we see that the last shot is the sled Rosebud being thrown away after he died and burning up in the flames. So we realize that achievement, just for the sake of achievement, is very meaningless. It's more or less a pacifier. You'll give a pacifier to a baby because when he sucks on it, he quits crying. And you give recognition to people because that's what they clamor for, and when you give them recognition, then they quit crying for it. But as soon as they get recognition, it doesn't satisfy them anymore at all. Because there is nothing that will satisfy the soul, no form of pleasure, such as the world has. The soul can only be satisfied by the achievement of reflecting reality. And it is not real what the world has. It is absolutely unreal, and it does seem like a dream. And the older you get, the more you realize that life has a dreamlike quality. Because the great divine director pointed out to me one time, he said, all of the movies and all of the writings that create great books and all of these things, he said, are but psychic episodes in either one or more persons' lives. And people sit there fascinated by these psychic dramas, and they are basically playbacks of the same type of plot over and over again with different name changes. And yet people will sit there like that one man in Chicago. He got a new television set, and he sat there, and he wouldn't leave his house to go to work to support his family. He never again left his house, and he wasn't a rich man. His wife had to divorce him because he wouldn't walk out of that door. He sat there in front of that TV set. He got immersed in all these soap operas and all the things were going on, and he refused to recognize the reality of the world again because the television was real to him. And basically, in one sense of the word, that's what we ourselves sometimes permit ourselves to do without recognizing it. We get involved in the psychic episodes of our own selves, and we are concerned with that. And that will never give us emancipation. It's like Rosebud. It'll go up in flames. The only thing that will absolutely retain for us forever reality is the contact with our divine self and the outworking and outpicturing of our divine plan. The divine plan will bring consolation to man. It will bring achievement. It will bring a sense of well-being. It will bring the recognition of truth. It will produce real, genuine happiness. And a man can have all of that from God and still be a useful instrument in the world. And that's what I would like to say to the young people today. You who have a little more years than some of the oldsters, theoretically speaking, and this is not guaranteed. It's only theoretically speaking, because anyone from the time they're 3 days old or 1 day old on, they can find their day would be numbered. And no one has any guarantee of anything. We're safest when the good Lord is taking care of us. So pleasure is not the answer, and competition is not the answer. People have competed for the world's goods like Judy Garland. and they have found that they have become an idol in the public eye. And they have had to take to sleeping pills and drugs in order to sleep, because they are so unholy, so unwholesome in their own eyes, so belittled, regardless of all that they have attained of name and fame, that they cannot rest. Their poor, tired, taut nerves just hold them in a death grip. And the only way they can relax is to take these drugs, and then for a while it works, and then after a while it doesn't work anymore, and they take a stronger dose, and then after a while that doesn't work anymore, and then they take another stronger dose, and after a while that doesn't work anymore, and then they take another stronger dose, and on until after a while they are no longer with us, and it's an old Hollywood pattern. It's an old pattern in the whole world. It goes on. I don't rejoice in it, but it is an example. So you see, you don't get it in pleasure, you don't get it in name and fame, you don't get it in competition with your fellow men. And you don't certainly get it in the music that the world is putting out today, which should never bear the name of music. It is insanity. And the music that we are hearing today, which is being forced upon us in every elevator, in every department store, in every restaurant of any size, even in the corridors of office buildings. A music, if you can call it that, I keep saying it again and again because it shocks me, that not only is or has passed beyond the stage of jungle drums, but has now gone in, as acid rock has gone into, what we will call the vibrations of the depths of Satan himself. Because this acid rock brings out the very lowest vibrations that a human being could possibly have. And as proof of that, we find that again and again people listening to this acid rock come to such a sense of freedom, but it's not real freedom, freedom from inhibitions that govern the mores not only of society but also of common decency, that they disrobe and take all their clothes off in front of the audience without even having the benefit of drugs. They're just blunted by the music, the satanic revels. And if you would like to know it, in Africa and other parts of the world, in fact, in many parts of the world, what is known as the orgy has been carried on, the bacchanal rituals, in which the people, in a reckless sexual abandon, throw off their garments and dance around men and women naked. Well, this is not the way the Lord wants people to live, because what is the end of that? Is there any end to it? It's like the wife trading that's going on in some parts of the world, where they take the keys. The husbands ask their wives for their keys, and the husbands take all the keys and throw them in a hat. And they shake the keys up, and the women reach in the hat and pull out a key, and they go home with whatever man's key they get, whatever house key they get. Well, this is certainly an example of what the world is going to today. Acid rock, vileness of all kinds of description. Tonight, I was shown from the Rocky Mountain News a clipping of a movie now being made by Omar Sharif, I guess it's already made, in which he is playing heroically Che Guevara. And I am reminded that this is a Christian nation, that this nation is spreading abroad through the moving picture screen and glorifying a role of a revolutionary. And the people are paying their money and sending their children to see Che Guevara, who was the leader of the revolution in Cuba. And I consider such movies inciting to riot and treason against America. And I ask myself again, what is happening to this country, because I have seen the American dream as it existed before we entered this era. Some of you in this room have not seen it. You don't remember it as it was before it was tarnished. Yet, of course, we had the Teapot Dome scandal. We had all kinds of infamy in the political world, and we have had it, I guess, from the time of Cain's killing of Abel. There has always been a certain amount of that. We can understand that. But there is certainly too much of it in high places now. So let's just leave that world. Let's leave it behind. It will not bring us satisfaction. Let's turn away from it and stop to consider now what some of the real things of life are. Well, the first thing I would like to start with is the idea of being God. You said being God? Well, it's the same thing as being good, you see. These words are interchangeable. Being good or being God is the same thing. The divine image is that simple. And being good does not mean just to be a do-gooder. It doesn't mean it's just a person that says, "Do you see how good I was? Wasn't I wonderful?" Not that kind of good, but the kind of good that recognizes that the space-time continuum in which we live is only a drop in an infinite ocean. And we are not so much interested anymore in the drop as we are in the ocean. The drop we have had. Now we say, "Give us the ocean." But there is a very definite requirement, according to the Brotherhood, a very definite requirement that we must meet before the ocean can be given to us in that vast and marvelous interchange of identities. And that requirement has to do with responsibility and the moral sense. I've always thought that suicide was a coward's way out, and I still believe it. So this is exactly what I'm talking about. We must beware of the great crime of escapism. Do the dishes, Johnny. "Oh, Mom, I want to do something else. There's a good television show on. I'll do 'em later. You do 'em." "I'm sorry, you've got to do the dishes now." That's responsibility and the desire to evade responsibility. In the time-spatial continuum, we have basic responsibilities, and we must beware of the crime of escapism. For, you see, genuine escapism from this planet as a springboard must come about through the fulfillment of the sense of divine mission. It means that your life stands for something. It's not against something, it's for something. Anybody can be against something. And there's a lot of things in this world to be against, as I've pointed it out to you. But you shouldn't take away from people everything that they have unless you can give them something in return. And what we have to give them in return is the reality of themselves. You say they already have it. Yes, but they don't know it, and they don't know how to develop it. And that is why the Lord has said that we must, by preaching, by admonishing the brethren, feed the sheep of God, feed my lambs. The innocent lamb consciousness cannot be developed by giving the world instructions in the art of doing the frug or in the sex life of African butterflies or any other silly kind of idea. We have to develop a sense of responsibility, and the word response is important. We can't look to escape, but we have to see that by doing the correct things, we are creating a matrix for a divine key that when it is inserted in a divine lock will open a divine door. And if we go up any other way, except through that Christ attainment, we are thieves and robbers. And there is no possibility of a thief or a robber entering into the kingdom. unless that thief or robber relinquishes his robbing and his thievery and his robbing consciousness and his thieving consciousness and decides that he is going to settle him down and make his life a key. And that key is the key of responsibility. Oh yes, in Gethsemane, how many voices said to him, "You are wiser than Caesar, and you, tomorrow, if you want to, can accept a temporal crown, and you can build an army, and you know that you have the know-how to conquer this Christian world." This Christian world that was just beginning. See, he was just beginning Christianity then. He, the Christ, on Palm Sunday, could have ruled the world. They wanted to crown him king, and they would have given him their life. And he had many Romans that also respected him. And he could no doubt have received not the heavy cross that followed him up the hill, the stony hill point, the cold and dark tomb, the pushing of the cold steel into his side, the nails hammering into his body. He wouldn't have had to have any of this at all. It would have been a very comfortable life he could have led. He could have been crowned with more glory and honor than Caesar. But he chose to reject it. And the choice was not easy, even for him, because he sweat great drops of blood while making that decision. His life was a mission, the same as your life is a mission and my life is a mission. But he made the right decision. And it was a costly decision. It cost the human self everything. In this case, it did cost him his life. And he never did take up a worldly life afterward. The closest that he ever came to it before his ascension was that wonderful morning when he went out there very early and he saw the mist over the sea. He looked out there and he saw the fishing boat of the disciples coming in, but they couldn't see him. So he gathered together some wood and he built a little fire by the sea. And then he got some fish. And the great master, after his crucifixion and resurrection, prepared these fish enough to feed the disciples. And he put it on the fire there and heated the fish. When they came in, he says, "Come and dine." So in his high state, he yet fulfilled the sense of responsibility to the stomachs of his disciples. He fed them. And this, I think, is one of the great roles that we must all recognize for ourselves. It reminds me of the story of the young man who was hitchhiking along the road, and the wonderful plumber came along, this great big husky plumber, and he said, "Where are you going, son?" And he says, "Down the road a piece." He said, "Well, hop in." He got in. The hitchhiker said to him, he said, "You're smoking." He said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Well, you know," he says, "if the Lord wanted you to smoke, he'd have put a chimney on you." They come to the next corner. The car pulled to a halt. Brake went down. The plumber says, "Yep." He said, "Well, here's where you get out." He says, "If the Lord wanted you to ride, he'd have put wheels on you." And this actually happened. So we have to recognize then the cold and beautiful reality of life. That if the Lord had wanted us right now, this minute, to be singing those beautiful Gloria in Excelsis Deus, if he wanted us up in heaven right this minute, we would be there and not here. And we are here because the most practical place in the world for us in our present state of evolution is right here. And we have lessons to learn. We have a bright world to conquer, or a world to make bright. We have spiritual responsibilities, we have material responsibilities, and we must fulfill our mission as Christ fulfilled his. If we already were the fullness of the hope that God had for us when we were first created as a little child, if we had it all, we fulfilled it all, we would now be in heaven with our Lord. And so, while it is true that we can perhaps ignore all of the divine mandates if we wish. We can have the loaves and the fishes. We can have Caesar's crown. We can have the pleasures of the world. We can have recognition by the multitudes and no shame. We can have supposedly an idyllic world, rock and roll and acid and everything that goes with it. Short or long, the real important thing is our recognition of our spiritual mission. And we have one, you and I. Supposing we don't take it up now. Supposing we say, well, we'll take it up next lifetime or the next one after that or maybe later. You see, the problem here is it's like having a Swiss bank account and you can't remember the number. And they won't give you the money without the number. No tickety, no shirty, son. So this is the thing. You make the resolve now and you say, well, I'll do all these things, Lord, in my next lifetime. But let me have some pleasure now. Let me have some fame now. Let me have all these things. My soul cries out for all these things. You get your next life. You have this one. But you don't remember your decision. And you don't have any possibility because the way it's set up, and it has to be this way, you don't get your full memory back until you're an adept. You get a little of it back when you first are an adept. It comes in snatches. When you become a master unascended, you get probably over half of it back. But until you ascend, you don't get it back in its full status. After your ascension, you get your whole memory back. You can remember your first embodiment on earth and all of the events all the way through. You have your whole history. Usually the first thing that people do when they get their whole cosmic memory back is they go out in the garden of that memory and they start pulling. And the first thing you know, they make a big bonfire. And the universe makes a pact with them and agrees to delete from the record that negativity. Because they don't want it anyway after it is offered to them. The only thing they want are the flowers from their garden of memories. The virtuous things they've done. So after all then, if you had to face your higher self right today, and that beautiful white, radiant higher self come walking right up to the earthly self of you and join hands with it, what would that higher self demand of your lower self? It would be your higher self that would demand it. It would demand that you purge yourself of iniquity, of injustice, of impurity, of impiety, of unrighteousness, of dust, and that you clothe yourself with immortality and light. Well, you'd be the first to agree because I think the most persuasive person in the universe to the individual is his own higher self. It's the real vibration that God created him in. It's his own unique vibration, the higher vibration. It's the real man, as he really is. So you see, inasmuch as you eventually will meet this higher self, either in an initiation ceremony, between embodiments, or somewhere along the way, I can tell you this, that he is called the dweller on the threshold. That is, one part of him is. He's sort of dual. You have this dweller on the threshold that can be this hydra-headed monster that you have to slay first before you see your real self. So in one sense of the word, I always identify the dweller in my own mind with the real self. Because you see, you have to meet him and take care of him. That's all your own monstrosities that you've created, and he's right there. When you get rid of all that, then you see the doorway is open into who you really are. Well, you know, this is a little bit of an enigmatic thing I'm telling you. It's a little hard to understand unless you really know what I'm talking about. But who is the dweller? It's the sum total of all of your negatives that stands there and guards your real self, the positive side of you. Why? Because you have to first meet and slay him before you can come face to face with your own reality. Because this is the God you've put before it. This is the other God that you have put before the real God. Every single choice that you have made, every choice that involves loving pleasure more than loving God, every choice that involves raising yourself up and downing the other fellow, every little smidgen of gossip, everything that you've engaged your mind in and being in that is impure or unrighteous does return right to your doorstep. And the most hateful men in all eternity are the priests or ministers who stand up here and tell you that everything that you've done is going to be blotted out because one man has paid the debt for you, without realizing what that one man really did. He did the same thing that you are going to have to do for yourself. And he never intended that it should be against the laws of the universe. The laws of the universe say that not one jot or one tittle shall pass away until all these things be fulfilled. And this means that whatever you and I do becomes law for us. And heaven and earth will not pass away until all of that is fulfilled that we have done. And therefore, the man that stands up and tells you that all you have to do is just believe is only giving you a bunch of hogwash. And it's a horrible thing because it builds false confidence in people. And I think that even though we have some fairly young people here tonight, they're wonderful young people, I think I would be justified in saying this, that many a young girl or a young man has committed one of the most immoral indiscretions possible on a Saturday night and has gone in early Sunday morning to the priest and confessed the sin. And this was on, we'll say, the 31st of May. And the following week, they were also present at the confessional fount once again to confess the same indiscretion. And year after year, through the whole story of their life, they have been confessing sin and asking for forgiveness. It seems like what they really wanted was forgiveness. But they wanted their own way. They wanted their own indulgence. They wanted to be able to do just what they wanted to be able to do. And they were not too interested through their church and through their religion in escaping into the reality of the right kind of life. So what young people and people of all ages must understand is that we don't get away with anything. Sure, we can sow our wild oats, but we're going to reap our wild oats too. So the whole thing to realize is that even if we do sow them, we're not going to get a great deal out of it. I think there's a great similarity to pleasure and pain. Maybe you won't agree with me at the present time, but somehow or other, you can have so much pleasure that it's just too much for you and you're happy to have it end. And you can have so much pain that it hurts so much that you're happy to have that end. And I think basically that the happiest time that people have is when things are just going along normal. They're neither hurting too much or feeling too good. Because they can take that, you see. But these ecstatic moments or moments of debasement, these are not too happy. And therefore I think that out of the wonders of balance, equanimity, holding the soul in perfect balance, not allowing the forces of evil to gain a foothold, and not allowing a sense of being good just to be good or to be self-righteous to take a foothold, but recognizing that we are already in the eyes of God creatures of perfection, and that all we have to do is to recognize that He is the fountain of perfection. We are the Grail, and we've got to become the Holy Grail. We've got to become knights and ladies. We've got to recognize that there was a reason for the word courtesy. And we've got to understand there's something very beautiful in outpicturing courtesy and grace in ourselves, if it's real. And we have got to teach the world, the whole world, that it is more blessed to give than to receive. Because you can never get anything that's worth having unless you pay for it. Always remember that. And that, of course, is the first basic principle in economics. And it's the first principle in spiritual economics. In fact, Jesus Christ would never have so bankrupted the world by himself paying the price for everyone else, because it wouldn't work. Now, if it would work, he would do it. He's that big-hearted, and there's plenty of you that are that big-hearted. I can take you out into the world, almost any church, and find people whose hearts are that big, that they would lay down their life for humanity right today. I can take you to people who would walk into an airplane propeller, or jump overboard of a cliff, or out of an airplane, or do anything. They destroy themselves in an instant if they thought the world would be saved because of their death. Yet it's a whole lot harder to live day by day than it is to commit suicide. But that's where the beauty of life comes in, is in living. Not in escaping, not in dying, but in living for God. That's everything. Living for God is everything. Because we only have a certain number of days, just like we have so many hairs in our head. We've only got so many. We were joking tonight with Bob in the back row there. I said that I'd like to have the money that I could make from selling him Brill cream to keep that one hair down, you see. But then we've got a surplus of hair around the room here, and if we would distribute it a little bit, of course, everybody'd have enough. But life doesn't work that way. We all have our individual missions, our individual bodies, our individual consciousness. We have our own bank account. And nobody else should really pay the price for us. Because if they did, it would defraud us from receiving the greatest blessing we possibly could get, and this is why Jesus didn't pay it all. He only paid enough so that he could manifest the fullness of the real Christ identity to humanity. But he was willing to do it. Don't ever think he wasn't. And there's many others that are willing to do it. But you can't do it by cosmic law. If you could, you see, the world would have been saved a long time ago, because there's been plenty of good men in the world, plenty of good women. But what we need today is people who will recognize the reality and the justice and the fairness of the law and the wonders of the mission. The Christ mission includes you. You can be a living Christ. You can live for Christ. You can purify your mind. You can stop being selfish and thinking of your own pleasure. Think of the pleasures of creating some joyous vibration in the universe for God himself. Who ever thinks of God? He's the millionaire. He's the great millionaire that lives on the hill. He's Midas, who has the riches of Croesus. I mean, all of the treasures. Lord, I have this talent here, which you gave me. I buried it in a napkin. I've saved it for you all these years, Lord. I'll open up the napkin now. I'm going to give you back all that you have. I knew that you were a very rich man, Lord, and I knew that you were a bit hard too. I know that you always reaped wherever you sowed, and I also knew that you reaped many times where you didn't even sow, Lord. So here I have just what you gave me. I'm giving it back to you. Depart from me, you wicked and unprofitable servant. That's what the Lord told him. Depart from me. Go into outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. I think that God needs to be recognized for all that he has done for us. And I think the highest tribute we can pay to God is to be like him, to give ourselves away. As St. Paul said, I will gladly spend and be spent for you. If we give ourselves away for God, we will have God. If we, like misers, hold everything into ourselves and keep it all bottled up inside, we won't have anything. We've got to let the great flame of freedom blaze through our pores, consume our dross, be a fiery furnace of immortal life while we walk here in this world below. Manifest and reflect the perfection of God by our thoughts. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. We've got to welcome fellowship with the Lord Christ. Certainly we love Jesus. Certainly Jesus loves us. Certainly he would pay the price for us. Certainly we'd pay the price for him or for anybody else if we know the meaning of love. If we don't know the meaning of love, let's find it and discover it. But how do you do it? You do it by becoming love in action. How do you become love? You have to first learn what love really is. And love is God. And this rightfully will wrought change in our world. And it's a beautiful change. It's a beautiful sense that you will develop in this change. It's going to change your mind. It's going to change your life. It's going to change your vibration. It's going to change everything. It's going to create the satsanga that you really should have. You know what's going to happen then? You're going to enjoy singing songs unto God. You know, Peter and Paul, they sang even in prison. You're going to enjoy your singing. You're going to enjoy your decrees. You're going to enjoy thinking about nature and God. You're going to enjoy thinking about God in your body, thinking about God in your mind, thinking about God in your soul, thinking God, 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 God all the time. And it won't be torture. It won't be deprivation. Anything else would be deprivation. You're tired of hamburger. You're tired of cheese. You're tired of old rancid food. You want something that's alive, vital. You want grain waving in the wind, coming from the threshing floor of God. You want the bread that came down from heaven. You want to grow. You want to progress. You want to breathe reality and freedom. You want to be freedom. You want to be a part of those big white clouds, those fleecy white clouds that look like big feather beds up in the sky. You'd like to lay on those and just relax and watch the whole universe go by. See the stars come out. All of this you would like to have. Well, you can have it. The universe is your oyster. You can have everything. But you have to think along with God. You have to let his thoughts pass through the firmament of your mind. You have to become involved in life. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to be involved in this kind of life. It isn't a matter of politicking. It isn't a matter of getting out here in the street and doing irrational acts. In any field, whatever you do, you can do it with dignity. And you're going to make some mistakes. Everybody makes a few mistakes. And the more you do, probably the more mistakes you'll make, because you see, it's a matter of ratio. The man who does nothing makes few mistakes because he doesn't do anything. The man who does a lot, he's going to make more mistakes than a man who does half a lot, or a quarter of a lot. But what is really happening is that you're doing a great deal, and so you're also having many strikes to your good account. Strikes to your good account are important. We're all growing up, and that's one more mistake I'd like to talk about. And that's the mistaken idea that people have that we're all arranged in certain categories, like a filing cabinet. Here's little Miss 5-year-old, little Miss 10-year-old, little Miss 15, Mr. 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, and everybody over 40 is old. And so, of course, we have to have a whole new category now. That's the old 50-year-olds, the old 60-year-olds, the old 70 and the old 80-year-olds. Terribly old people, ready to die any minute. Old horses we could take out here and shoot them because they're not useful anymore. Take them to the boneyard. Well, right here in this activity and in California, we've got all kinds of people from 80 years on up that are still useful and serving. Quite useful and quite serving. So you see, forget all this foolish business about age. I can remember when I was 2 years old and yet less. In fact, I was 18 months. standing in the window looking down at the signal, the semaphore on the railroad station below the hill at night. 5 o'clock came every night, I'd run to the window. And in Wisconsin it was icy cold, and I'd press my nose against the glass, and pretty soon it would melt, and then I could see through, just from the warmth of my cheeks. And then I'd look out there, and sure enough, that green arm would come up, and the train would go by and blow the whistle. And I'd stand there fascinated. And I had a mind just as capable then as I do today of grasp of what was going on. I saw that train. It was a tutu pain. Now it's a train. But what difference does it make? I still knew what it was. You see? So you have consciousness. 18 months old. Sure. I remember the day they moved the stove out of the house we lived in till I was 12 months old. They took the stove out, and I couldn't say stove, I called it a coke. So I says, Coke's gone. Coke's gone. And I cried. Big tears run down my face because they'd taken the stove away. Every morning I woke up in my little cradle bed just like Aaron's or Sean's, and I'd stand up in it and I'd look at that little shiny black stove with a nickel plating around the oven. Well, you see, that was a familiar object. And people become attached to familiar objects. Now, of course, I would holler if they took my wife away. So you see, our ideals change. But I think that the thing we'd holler the most about was brought out by Mary Magdalene. And I would like to read it in closing my sermon for tonight, because this is a drama of reality that I'm going to close with. This is a drama of what is real and what is not real. But Mary stood without at the sepulchre weeping. And as she wept, she stooped down and looked into the sepulchre, and seeth 2 angels in white sitting, the one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. And they say unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? She saith unto them, Because they have taken away my Lord, and I know not where they have laid him. And when she had thus said, she turned herself back and saw Jesus standing, and knew not that it was Jesus. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? Whom seekest thou? She, supposing him to be the gardener, saith unto him, Sir, if thou have borne him hence, tell me where thou hast laid him, and I will take him away. Jesus saith unto her, Mary. She turned herself and saith unto him, Rabboni, which is to say, Master. Jesus saith unto her, Touch me not, for I am not yet ascended to my Father. But go to my brethren and say unto them, I ascend unto my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God. Mary Magdalene came and told the disciples she had seen the Lord, and that he had spoken these things unto her. Do you see? To see God is to relate him to yourself. He is your Father. He is your divine image. He is your eternal friend. He who cleansed the lepers through the Christ will cleanse us all, each one, from our wrongs and injustices. He will prepare a highway of holiness through the years upon which we can walk. He will bind up our wounds. He will restore a right spirit within us. He will renew in us love for the truth. He will lay down his garments that we may walk upon them as a shield, that the thorns do not prick our feet. He is everything to all men, and without him we are dust. But with him we are immortal life, and it is a life that is beautiful and worthwhile, that is living responsibility accepted by us as our own.